I do the fire safety announcement, so it's kind of weird because if you've been to one of these talks before, that's normally my bit, and then I just go and sit and listen to the talk. But tonight you've actually got me giving the talk. So obviously this evening we're talking about parasites. This, weirdly, everyone signed up so quickly to this talk. I don't know if you had loads of ticks when I sent out the invite or what happened, but everyone was like immediately signing up. So I think that proves that this is an interesting topic and people are interested to learn more about parasites. So yeah, this evening what we're going to cover, what are parasites. So we'll go through sort of what parasites that exist locally and what the risks are in and around Newbury. We're going to talk a little bit about risk assessments and lifestyle risk assessments. We're going to talk about preventing and treating parasites this evening. We're going to mention a little bit about our healthcare plans, and then we're going to talk about the environmental impact of parasite treatment and what potentially the future of parasite treatment and control is going to look like moving forward. It might sound like a lot, but we'll get through it, and I promise you'll make it home at some stage. So first of all, what are parasites? So a very simple definition of parasites they are organisms that need another living organism to survive. So things like fleas, ticks, they cannot survive without other animals to live off, basically. So yeah, number one on the list, as I say, is the external parasites. So we've got fleas, ticks, and mites. So that is a lovely picture of a flea. You probably will never see a flea that high definition ever in your life unless you own a microscope. More commonly what you'll see on your pets, that didn't come out very well, but is little flecks in their coat, particularly if they're white coloured. So you'll notice little dark specks in their coat. Most of the time that is flea dirt rather than live fleas themselves. But if you're in any doubt, what you can actually do is comb through the coat, take that flea dirt, put it on a wet paper towel. If it turns red, because fleas eat blood from their hosts, then you're pretty convinced that the animal has got a flea problem, if that's what you're dealing with. Then again, next up we've got ticks. Pretty much everybody will probably be familiar with ticks if you're from in and around Newbury. They are rife in this area. Hands up if you've removed a tick from your dog or cat this year already. Hands up if you've removed a tick from yourself this year already. Yeah, so ticks are bad this year. Northern Ireland does not really have ticks. We're not really a tick area, and I got my first tick this year, and I was personally offended by it because I thought, I've lived in Newbury for 7 years now, I've not had a tick. Probably they don't like me. No, turns out there is a really high tick population this year because I've done that walk many times and never had a tick, so this is the year. But again, most of the time you'll see ticks like this attached to your pet, swelling up after they've had a feed, and that's usually how we'll see them when they're presented. And again, mites, you're not going to see mites like this ever in your life again if you have a microscope, and they are quite uncommon, so most of the time on your pets there's not really a huge amount to see on the skin when you're looking at them. Then we'll move on to the worms. So intestinal parasites or internal parasites. We've got roundworm, tapeworm, and lungworm. The next pictures are not the most pleasant, but roundworms are, as they say, round in structure, and most of the time you'll see them passed in feces. If you are seeing live roundworms and your pet has a problem, that is what they will look like. Tapeworm, again, you tend not to see full tapeworms, so tapeworms tend to be passed in segments. More often a problem in cats, mainly because they hunt quite a lot, so their tapeworm exposure is a lot higher than in dogs. We do see it in dogs because dogs scavenge things as well, but cats tend to have a higher tapeworm issue. Usually you're seeing these little segments in and around the base of their tail or on the hair around their bum. That's usually where you're seeing these segments stuck if you're having issues in your cat with tapeworm. And then last up, we've got lungworm. Again, unless you have an electron microscope, you're never going to see a lungworm looking like that. So I've never seen a lungworm looking like that. So it's very unlikely that you're going to come across a visible lungworm parasite on your pet. So when we get to Newbury, what is our risk level in this area? We're incredibly lucky because we've got lots of really nice woodland wildlife walks, very nice rural surroundings, and the perfect habitat for basically every parasite that I've just mentioned. So fleas, ticks, worms, they all love to hang out in these areas, mainly because we've got lots of these little friends running around. So we've got a lovely deer population, but they do carry quite a high parasite level, which is where a lot of the ticks in this area are coming from. So certainly that's probably why this area has a higher tick burden than other places. again, lungworm is something that we see more and more in this area. It's definitely on the rise in the southern UK area. This is a heat map basically of lungworm cases that have been diagnosed, and obviously we're down here in the brighter red area. My first job was actually over here in this very bright red area. South Wales is rife with lungworm, and when I actually moved to Newbury, I decreased the amount of lungworm cases that I saw quite significantly. So I think we are high risk in this area, but I wouldn't say we're very high risk, but it is definitely something that we're seeing an upward trend in this area. Flea risk is kind of all year round now, mainly because we have cats who are going in and out of lovely heated homes, bringing home tag-along fleas with them into the heated homes. Once the fleas get into the nice warm house, they tend not to leave in the winter time. So if you're a cat owner, that is probably something to be aware of, that keeping your cat flea protected all year round is something that is quite important. Ticks, again, very active spring until autumn, but I'm sure a lot of you know that the season is getting longer because the summers are getting warmer and wetter, so it probably used to be ticks are not seen past September, October. I think now we're seeing them probably most of the way until Christmas, unless it's super cold, which the last couple of years have not been. So I think they're becoming more of an all year round problem, and the amount of time that we're seeing them not in the environment is decreasing. So let's move on to a bit more specifics. Fleas. So what can fleas do? They can cause skin issues, particularly allergies. So this cat on the right-hand side of the screen has got flea allergic dermatitis. So you can see it's been over-grooming its entire abdomen and back legs. And definitely it's sort of caused quite a severe allergy in this cat. Cats are much more likely to be allergic to fleas than dogs. So certainly if you're a cat owner, this is something that we need to be aware of. Something that a lot of people probably aren't aware of is fleas can actually spread tapeworm as well. So it's like a Russian doll of parasites that I'm going to teach you about tonight, probably things that you didn't ever want to know. But this is an incredibly complex diagram from the government in America, but essentially the flea is an intermediate host up the top here of the tapeworm segments. Then they're ingested by the end hosts, which includes us very nicely. So essentially, if you're potentially ingesting infected tapeworm, flea-infected tapeworm segments, then you also could get a tapeworm. Thanks, America. Anyway, we'll move swiftly on from that. So if you have an active flea population in your environment, adult females will lay 50 eggs per day. So each single flea that you see has the potential to produce 50 more adult fleas. The flea life cycle is about 3 months, so if you saw one flea today, theoretically 3 months down the line that could become 50 fleas in your environment. So you can see how the problem escalates quite quickly. If you're seeing fleas and you leave it untreated, it can become a real big problem. They survive quite well in home environments. As I said, it's nice and warm, so it's the perfect environment for them to live in. And they can lie dormant, so even if you've moved into a new house and the person before didn't deal with their flea problem, you could potentially inherit it if they didn't deal with it. So yeah, good to know, just to be aware of. If anyone's moving house soon, you might want to flea treat it just before you move in. They need consistent treatment for about 3 months in order to rid the infestation, so that's of the pets and of the environment. So hoovering, cleaning, lovely flea sprays, treating your pets for 3 months is the only, and being consistent with it is the only way to get rid of a true flea infestation. If any of you have experienced a flea infestation, you will know how bad it is, because it does take a long time to get it back under control again. Yeah. Next up, we've got ticks. As I say, they're more commonly found from spring until autumn. The big risk with ticks is more what they carry. So Lyme disease is probably one of the more common diseases that they carry, but there are other emerging parasites that ticks are intermediate hosts for as well. So Babesia is a little intracellular parasite, so it lives in red blood cells, so it's these little purple dots that are living inside the red blood cell. It used to be an exotic disease, but because obviously we've been rescuing quite a lot of dogs from abroad, then some of these dogs have come with Babesia and we've imported the disease. And particularly in Essex, I don't really know why, but they all seem to be in Essex. Maybe they've got a little pocket of ticks in Essex that are infected with babesia. But there are a cohort of dogs who have never travelled outside of the UK and have been diagnosed with this disease. So it definitely can be spread locally within the UK if you're in the right spot and if we've got the exact breed of tick that carries it. People who study ticks will study tick populations across the UK and give us figures on the levels of them. Certainly, as I say, that pocket in Essex seems to be the most prevalent one for the babesia population at the minute, but it's just something that we need to be aware of going forward, especially, as I say, because we've been rescuing quite a lot of dogs from abroad, so we just need to be cautious of what we're, I guess, dealing with when we're bringing these pets in. When it comes to removing ticks at home, I would recommend that you get one of these little tick hooks if you haven't already. They're very handy. You just hook them underneath, give them a little twist and pull upwards. And usually they're pretty straightforward to remove. Has anyone used a tick hook?
Yeah.
Yes. Did anyone struggle? Only to get the dog to sit still, a most common issue with the ticks. And also preventative treatments are available for ticks. So obviously we've got a range of prevention that we can use for ticks in this area. Worms. So, yes, this slide is busy. We've got a lot of different worms that can be potential issues for our pets. So roundworm and tapeworm, particularly if you have them in a very high burden, especially in younger dogs and in immunosuppressed individuals, that we sort of older animals or animals with other conditions, that's when we tend to see most problems with them. Weight loss especially, but other sort of gut issues, intussusceptions, which is where one piece of the gut telescopes into another one, can be triggered by those if they've got worms in very high numbers, and also sort of poor absorption and poor digestion of nutrition can also be sort of linked to a very high worm burden. Toxocara canis is a particular type of roundworm. The reason I've mentioned it is because it is actually something that can be transmitted to humans, especially to children. This lovely poster up here with the dog poo eyes was launched by Dublin City Council when I was in university, so that's why I vividly remember it. But essentially the parasite can migrate through neurological tissue in humans and can cause blindness and neurological issues in kids. So it's something, again, to be aware of. And my sister, who lives in sunny Bournemouth, which is essentially the UK's biggest sandpit, I do appreciate that, but she is an optician and she started working in 2017 and has already diagnosed a child as blind as a result of having this infection. So it isn't a risk that is fictitious, it is a real issue, but as I say, obviously the amount of animals that are in this area is quite high, but it's, as I say, it is something that we need to be mindful of when we're thinking about this. Lungworm. So lungworm, as I say, I used to work in South Wales, so we used to see an awful lot of lungworm in that area. And it does cause quite serious disease in affected dogs. So clotting issues and respiratory problems are probably the two biggest things that we see. And it can be life-threatening. So when I was working in Wales, we actually used to pre-treat our routine spays, neuters and dentals with worming treatment because the lungworm level was that high, to prevent clotting problems during the surgery. So yeah, it's something that if it is a problem, it really can cause a lot of issues.
Why is it higher?
Why is it high? Climate and
Because it's wetter?
Because it's wetter. So yeah, slugs and snails are the intermediate host for lungworm. So if you've got more slugs and snails, then you've got more lungworm risk. So and yeah, as I say, where I was, it was a massive problem. So it was something that if I thought the dog had kennel cough, I would probably treat it for lungworm as well, even though I had no real indication that there was a lungworm problem, mainly because the number of times that I said, oh, it's probably kennel cough, and it comes back in 2 days later coughing up blood, and you think, I could have treated this 2 days ago, presumptively, and didn't. So I think it's, as I say, it is something that definitely is an issue. And then I guess we're talking about risks of how can we reduce exposure of our pets to worms. So scavenging behaviour is probably number one. I think that collie's eating a sandwich, but that probably doesn't have many worms in it. More so scavenging of organic material, dead animals, lots of other disgusting things, feces, all the lovely things in the world that dogs eat. But limiting that as much as possible is going to help to reduce your dog's risk. I know it's difficult, but do your best, because they usually get there before you do, and also you don't really want to stick your hand in a lot of things that they've been dealing with, so, you know. Eating slugs and snails, again, is another thing that, as I say, for the lungworm side of things, is important to limit that as much as we can. Flea issues, as I said, with the tapeworm, if we're dealing with the flea issues, we're going to deal with the tapeworm issues simultaneously, so keeping that under control as well is important. Honourable mention to raw diet. Most raw diets are very well parasite controlled, but there are a cohort of unregulated raw diets that are on the market. I think if you're feeding something that can't guarantee that it has good parasite control within its production, you should probably be increasing your worming in response to that. I think it's something to be aware of, and I think the raw food people are dealing with this, but as I say, there are some slightly more unregulated brands that don't really subscribe to the beliefs of most of the population, so just be aware of that if you are feeding your pets raw. Worm Watch. So tonight our talk is sponsored by Bowringer. Thank you, Mike. He supplied your food. He supplied everything for this evening. So and they do a study they've done a study called Worm Watch, which is where they have gone into some local parks and taken soil samples of these local parks. They're particularly looking for the Toxocara worm, which is the child poo eye worm mentioned previously, so that was particularly what they were looking for. They took samples from 142 parks, and I think it was in multiple towns and cities across the UK, as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong at any stage. And in those parks, 86.6% of the parks were positive for that Toxocara worm egg. So it is something that is circulating at relatively high levels in the general population. So it is something that we do, as I say, we have to be aware of. So when we're talking about how do we prevent our dogs from shedding this worm, essentially the top diagram here shows that if you give a worming tablet at month 0, and then the next day, for example, your dog was lucky to be in one of these 86.6% of infected soil areas and consumed some of the Toxocara eggs, that worm would then become an adult about 5 weeks after it ingested that sample of soil. So essentially, if you were worming every 3 months, your dog would be shedding from 5 weeks into that worming schedule. So we're not really decreasing the amount of shedding into the environment if we're only worming every 3 months. So that's why monthly worming has become a lot more important. As I say, this is all about more so protecting humans than protecting dogs, but it's part of what we do as vets, is we kind of do both jobs. We wear both hats at times. So monthly worming is the only way to decrease the shedding and decrease the exposure risk to dogs and humans across the board, really. So that's why there's been a big move towards monthly worming from that side of things.
Sorry, my brain doesn't compute to say them later. What if the dog becomes new to the worming tablets, all the worms become new to the amount of times we are worming and fleeing and everything else?
I guess at the minute there is no significant resistance in the worm population to the products that we're using, would be the first thing that I would say. So obviously, I think, well, I come from a farming background, so I'm used to talking about worm resistance. So obviously in those kind of circumstances, they were worming 100% of the population 100% of the time and basically killing off only the weak worms and leaving the strong ones to survive. I think if we were worming 100% of dogs 100% of the time and 100% of cats 100% of the time, I think that's a pipe dream. I don't think that's ever going to happen in the UK, mainly because humans are involved, so we forget to do it. We're not doing it, like, you're not running every dog in the UK through a crush and dosing them like every single time. So I don't think it's likely that we'll see the same problem.
The other thing to add, sorry to put in, is that in cattle and in horses, they're grazing the feces. So like where you treated the cattle and the horses, and then they're defecating on that field, they're then grazing. So if there are any resistant worms, they're then eating the resistant worms again. So you're selecting for resistance in that life cycle. Whereas dogs and cats, unless you've got the ones who do eat their own food, that is less likely to happen than it is in cattle and horses and sheep and all the rest of it as well.
What's the difference also about, you can get like the spot when you put on the
or you can get a tablet you put in their phone.
Yep.
Do they both work the same, or is the one on the spot on the neck?
So it's difficult to give kind of specific advice on treatments because there are so many. So it kind of depends which spot on you're talking about and which like comparing the two products. If you're comparing two prescription products, and you're using a monthly spot on and a monthly tablet with the same level of medication in them, the two of them would work similarly. But there's so many products out there that it's, as I say, it's hard to delve into the specifics of which exact tablet and spot on you're comparing. So there will be time for questions at the end, don't worry. So if you think of more questions, please do feel free to ask me. Other parasites, so ear mites, again, something that we see quite commonly in kittens. Cats are definitely overrepresented for ear mites, and it's something that most flea and tick treatments will cover for. So if your cat has ear mites, then keeping up to date with any flea and tick product is important to keep those under control. Rarer worms, hookworms and whipworms, very uncommon, I would say. We don't see those that commonly. I think I've diagnosed it once. Anybody else diagnosed hookworm or whipworm? Yeah, one. Yeah, the occasional one, but definitely not the more common end of the spectrum. Demodex. So Demodex is a mite. We mentioned mites way at the start. Mites are definitely, we see them less generally as an ectoparasite. This little puppy on the top right has got classic signs of demodectic mange. So he's got hair thinning basically everywhere, and it tends to be incredibly itchy as well. From our side of things, I think we would only really see that if animals had probably never been treated for flea and tick and ectoparasite control. We don't really see it that commonly either. Other things to be aware of, exotic parasites. I know it's kind of tedious, but a lot of people go on holidays now, so I wanted to make you aware of that because obviously people travel with their dogs quite commonly. So Leishmania is a parasite that is carried by sandflies. So that's a little sandfly for you to have a look at. Then on the left-hand side, we've got a map of where is the highest levels are basically. So in the red is where most of the cases happen. Orange sections are sections where it's less common, but they've got the fly, so it's pretty possible. Yellow sections essentially are probably imported cases or cases that have been passed between family members of pets. Those are the most likely options for spread in those areas. We have definitely imported cases into the UK, similarly with our Babesia friends. We've also managed to import some Leishmania friends, so hopefully global warming doesn't warm up too much and the sandflies don't fly too far north, because otherwise we're going to have a bit of a problem. Heartworm, again, is another infectious worm that is spread by mosquitoes, so very similar distribution of heat map. Again, dark red is where it's being spread, so on the left-hand side we've got up until 2001, the right-hand side's up until 2011 only. I couldn't find a map that was more up to date than that online that was in any way helpful, or it was too detailed to be honest, but essentially you can see those darker red areas. We're getting more and more of them throughout Central Europe. Again, that's probably because the mosquitoes are flying further and further north because it's warmer and warmer. And again, in these lighter pink areas, those are imported cases. So again, we've managed to import it into the UK. So if we do ever get these little guys flying into our shores, then we probably will get heartworm being spread throughout the UK as well. Prevention and treatment. So as I said, it's quite difficult for me to give lots of in-depth advice because there are so many products out there on the market. If you want really specific prescription advice for your pet, my advice is give us a call afterwards and we can discuss it more in depth with you, because there are so many options these days for individual pets. Flea and tick prevention comes in pretty much all forms: tablets, spot on, injectable for dogs, and collars. Regular worming, again, tablets are more common, but there's a spot on version for cats. Lungworm treatments, again, tablets are more common, and pretty much always we're going to be recommending you as vets the prescription treatments because they're the ones that have more evidence and are more likely to be effective at treating your problems. So if you're coming to me and saying, I've got a flea problem, I'm probably not going to recommend you an over-the-counter treatment that isn't going to be effective at treating your home or treating your pet. When it comes to treating the environment, we need to remember to do that. So flea sprays, as I say, are probably the big thing with treating the environment, but also hoovering, washing bedding, good hygiene. All of those things are very important and are part of sort of limiting parasite transmission between pets, but also between pets and humans. So again, something to bear in mind. And anything you can do to decrease your pet's risk of exposure. So I don't know if you've got the neighbour's cat keeps coming into your house and it's got fleas all over it, you probably ought to dissuade it somehow if it's potentially going to infest your environment. And similarly, scavenging behaviour in dogs and cats to limit their exposure as much as possible. But again, I understand it's challenging to do that side of things if you've got a pet who is a scavenger. So, lifestyle risk assessment. Parasite is a new tool that's been launched relatively recently, and it's a parasite risk assessment tool. Mike's company made it for us, so essentially it's something that is quite useful for us to get an idea of what risks our pets are being exposed to. So essentially it's a little questionnaire that you go through. It asks you questions about whether your pet's indoors, outdoors, whether it goes to high risk environments, so things like doggy daycare, groomers, kennels. It asks you about hunting and scavenging behaviour. I actually don't know if it does ask you about travelling abroad. I think I just wrote that before I did the survey, but maybe it should. Yeah. Or if you're travelling to high risk areas, or if your dog has walked in high risk areas, all those kind of things are in the parasite risk assessment. I actually did this week with our work experience student just to get an idea of, because I don't have a dog or a cat, so I can't really do it. I'd be doing it fictitiously. So I thought I'll ask somebody who is not in any way affiliated with this conversation to do the parasite risk assessment. And as you can see, her dog came out as a moderate risk for fleas, moderate risk for roundworm, low risk of tapeworm, extremely high risk of ticks, and a very high risk of lungworm. So, and that is just from her, as I say, answering the questions, filling in the survey, and that's the risk profile that we got for her dog. I think this is probably where we're going to end up moving towards in future. I think vets have been doing this in consults for a long time, but maybe not communicating to you that that's what we've been doing, because I guess if you have a child in the consult, immediately we start thinking about spread of worms to children. If you say your dog goes to doggy daycare or you've got 6 ticks off him last week, again, that is all kind of part of the process of us prescribing flea and worm prevention to your pets. So I think we have been doing this kind of subconsciously, but I think this will get you guys a lot more involved in that process, make you see sort of what the patterns are, and get you involved in the thought process and exposure risk of your pets, and also exposure risk of yourselves. I guess that's probably where these things are going to come in handy going forward. I have popped a little note to fecal testing down the bottom, mainly because a lot of people ask about fecal testing, again because a lot of people are used to doing it in horses. I think the drawback of that at the minute is it is quite cost prohibitive. I think the cost of fecal testing at the minute is so high above where the cost of flea, tick and worm prevention is, that in order for us to bridge that gap, I think we've got a way to go. And certainly, how often should you be doing fecal testing this is all information that we don't really have good data on yet. How often should we be fecal testing animals if we're not giving them flea and worm treatment? And I think this is potentially where veterinary is going to move towards, but we're not there. We're not there yet, essentially, is what I'm saying.
Is there public access to that risk assessment?
Yes, there is. In fact, I think, Mike, your little key rings have got the QR code for the risk assessment on them, have they? Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, we've got you. We can send you home with the link to do it if you'd like. As I say, a brief mention to the healthcare plans. A lot of you probably know about this already because you're all clients, but it includes 12 months of your parasite treatment, annual vaccination, 6-month health check. Both of those are probably the best time to discuss parasite risks. So if you're doing the parasite risk assessment, that's probably the time to do it, because unless your pet has a lot of problems to discuss in those 2 appointments every year, then we've got time to discuss parasite and tailoring that towards your pet a little bit more probably at those times. As I say, the plans, they spread the cost. They give you peace of mind that your pet is covered for parasites all year round, if that's what you want. As I say, they're not for everyone. If you've got an indoor cat who's super low risk and doesn't go anywhere, doesn't hunt anything, literally never goes outside, then being on the healthcare plan is probably not going to be beneficial to you. But if you want to go on it, feel free, but I don't think it's going to be worth your while. And same if you've got a super low risk household, no children, no immunosuppressed people, and your dog has a really low risk lifestyle, never goes anywhere, never does anything, then again, your risk is probably going to be super low. Kind of back to resistance, etc. That was kind of where we were talking about earlier. So I think environmental impact of flea and worm treatment is something that is becoming more and more important. So both of these articles are about spot-on treatments specifically, and specifically the drugs that have been around quite a long time. So these are really old treatments that were being identified in the songbird nests and also in the open water swimming study that they've done. But I think that probably means that spot-ons are going to become a thing of the past as a result of these kind of pieces of information.
Dogs, maybe not cats.
Yes, in dogs, maybe not in cats, true. Cats don't tend to go swimming, so I guess that is a fair point. But yeah, certainly I think in dogs they are going to become less and less of the prescribed option, and we're going to move away from them. Mainly because of the concerns of wildlife, birds and fish being exposed to those drugs, and then what the potential knock-on side effects of that are to the environment that we live in. Again, with dogs, tablets and injectables are more likely to become the preferred options going forward. And I think there's definitely a move towards tablets becoming the more common way to give dogs their flea, tick and worm prevention. Injectable is something that is kind of on the up and up, but there's not that many injectable products yet that are available. Oh yes, I did say particularly in dogs. Thanks, Vicky. Vicky's it's like she's read my presentation. So yeah, decreased use of spot-ons, particularly in dogs. Increased use of the risk assessment, so the Parasite tool. There's other risk assessments out there, but the Parasite at the minute is probably the most user-friendly. So I think that's probably where we're going to see a lot of our future of parasite control moving towards. Again, I think worming frequency, much more likely to be done on the risk of exposure of the pet and the household risk. Test and treat protocols, as I say, they're out there, but I think for most people they're cost prohibitive at the minute. The cost of doing them versus the cost of treating and doing risk assessments is a hard one to kind of level out at present for most people. And then, as I say, I think again we have to be aware of the emerging exotic parasites, so Babesia, Leishmania and heartworm, all in the country, all have the potential to be spread if we have the right the other parasites in the country to spread them. So again, that's something that we need to be mindful of, even if we're worried about the environment and reducing our sort of parasiticide use across the board, but also if we have new emerging diseases that are becoming more and more of a problem, then again, I think it's finding that balance really that's most important.
Do you think there's a possibility that people will do the assessment and if they come up with low risk, they'll think, oh, I don't need to use preventative as
Yes.
much as I was?
I do, yeah. I do think that
it could then
that is a
become a
risk,
bigger
yeah. So I
problem.
think if you had a lot of people doing risk assessments and they were coming out low across the board, then there is that rebound risk effect where if we're decreasing our worming so significantly that the parasite levels in the parks, for example, are going above 86% and they're into 96, 99% of soil samples, then there is the potential that we have this massive rebound effect where we decrease so sharply that then the parasite levels increase so sharply. It's possible. It's hard to know how. It's until you're in that situation, it's kind of hard to know, but it is definitely possible. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can cats get lungworm because they get slugs stuck on their coat sometimes, don't they?
Yes, so they do have a lungworm, but it is a lot less common than the dog lungworm. I've never diagnosed one. I don't think anybody in this room has diagnosed a cat lungworm. Possible, but yeah, incredibly rare.